Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is in your time zone, wherever you are watching this. Welcome to our third module, Reclaiming Play. Hopefully, you've had an opportunity to complete the Reclaiming Play questionnaire that we put out last week. And this week, we're going to actually use that questionnaire for the basis of this introductory video and subsequent videos that we're going to have in this series. If you're watching this on YouTube, you obviously only get access to this specific video. But if you want the full series, you can get in contact with us. You can join the membership and have it included in your membership, or you can purchase the module as a standalone module. Anyway, so this module is Reclaiming Play. And let's start off by outlining what we're going to go through this month. We're actually going to start off with our reflections on our memories of play, and then we're going to move on to the definitions of play and how that contributes to the significance of play in our collective liberation. Other videos in the module are going to outline to you, once you've understood the significance of play, how to observe play and use play to nurture children's individual genius, whether you are a parent or you are an educator, the leader of a school, nursery nurse, kindergarten teacher, whatever you are, whichever age you work with, we're going to talk about how we can use play to nurture children's genius and to help us understand what that genius is. So I want to start off with this quote. And this quote states that play is the highest expression of human development in childhood, for it alone is the expression of what is in a child's soul. I absolutely love this quote. There are plenty of quotes on play that I love, but this one by Friedrich Froebel is my absolute favorite. Now, throughout the program, we're going to keep on touching on Friedrich Froebel's model for the kindergarten and his vision for education. I'm very open about the fact that obviously I'm educated in the West, but one of the key things about basing or developing our framework on some of these models is that there are so much existing research and existing evidence that can really guide us. But fundamentally, I really believe that Friedrich Froebel's philosophy on the kindergarten and children's early education is very reflective of African philosophy in lots of ways. But the key thing for me about Froebel's philosophy is Froebel was writing at a time where there was a lot of political unrest, let's say. His kindergartens or his philosophy was rooted in such a liberatory pedagogy that his kindergartens actually ended up being closed. We're going to touch on this when we talk about Friedrich Froebel specifically in the module. And so to have a kindergarten program that is so revolutionary, that is so evidence-based for me, is a key strategy that we can use in order to further our goals and our objectives. But let's talk about the definition itself. This idea that the highest expression of human development in childhood, meaning that when children are playing, they are in a state of flow. We're going to touch on this later. They are expressing the absolute peak of their development, the absolute peak of the understanding of the world, the absolute peak of what they know and what they don't yet know. It goes on to say that it alone is the free expression of what is in a child's soul. Now, the free expression of what is in a child's soul, for us to really understand, because remember, the basic premise of the work that we do is that every single child is a genius, and it is our responsibility as educators and as parents and the community more generally to nurture that genius. By observing, by knowing how to observe what the child is freely expressing, we are able to understand their genius, identify it, which obviously links into the intent framework, and nurture that. And that is the basic premise of all the work that we do here. Okay, I can talk about this quote forever, but our the rule is to keep these videos to 15 minutes. So we started off this month by exploring the memories of play of people within our community and also just generally. So we're going to talk about a few of those themes and what that means for the work that we are doing. So we started off by asking people about their own memories of play. Now, throughout the community, we highlighted that people had the innate capability or the innate capacity to transform everyday materials into play materials and to learn from that. Okay. So people mentioned that they, made balls from socks, they use paper and they use sand. These are things that readily and freely available to us. The ability to do this is widely documented in research and, of course, links to Frobelian pedagogy, which we're going to talk about later on, in that the ability to use the materials that are freely given to us by nature, but also the materials that are relevant to our culture to transform play, to transform those materials, is a key skill, is a cognitive skill, right? It's something that requires cognition. It's something that requires thinking. It's something that requires understanding. It's something that requires exploration. People also mentioned that they remember playing with rocks whilst counting. Now, this shows that we can use play, everyday play, right, to develop mathematical thinking. This method of exploration moves us away from this banking or reproductive method of education, right? It enables children to make sense of their environment, to master their environment and to transform it. So as you're playing with rocks and as you're counting with the rocks, you're learning about the rocks, but you're also learning how to count, right? You're learning about the environment. You're learning about the different materials. You're learning about the different properties of that rock, whilst also developing these key concepts that we need in education. People also identified that through play, they learned about the world, particularly through role playing the family and competing in groups. Now, this shows us how children, on how we as children, without the over interference of adults, were able to really develop social skills and to master our environment and to master our culture. We're going to touch on this a bit more later on. I actually have a funny story about this. The second theme that came up was that play enabled autonomy and fostered community. So a lot of people spoke about the fact that they had freedom to play, right? They were running around, absolute freedom in playing, they were playing in the neighbors' houses, running around botanical gardens, playing in a field till sunset. This idea of freedom that people have really speaks to particular skills that are being lost, and we're going to touch on that later on, right? But just having this freedom to play, that enables us to think freely. People also mentioned that through play, they were able to develop community cohesion by exploring these games with different people, people of different strengths, people of different age groups, you know, different value systems, perhaps. We are developing we're developing these skills, we're developing teamwork, we're developing negotiation, friendship, and perseverance. All of these things are skills that we have identified that we developed through play. Okay. Now, this idea of being happy, free, and connected to others, again, these are all values that we have to make sure that we protect. Other people mention learning through oral tradition, which I think is absolutely fantastic. They mentioned, sitting with their siblings, listening to their dad's folk tales. Ultimately, this really highlights the fact that play can be used as a vehicle for intergenerational transmission of information, like oral stories, values, principles, folk tales. These are all things that we haven't lost through our complicated political and social history because they have been passed down. And again, play is how we made sense of a lot of these things. So, as people have mentioned, they were able to play outdoors, connect with others. They were also able to role play. So, if you're hearing these folk tales, the natural thing that children will do is to replicate those folk tales in their play, right? Meaning that they're able to grapple with some of these more complex concepts, but also learn those lessons in real time, right? Because the whole point of the folk tales is to teach us lessons. So if children are able to enact those folk tales through role play, then they're also learning those lessons on a bodily level almost. Now, two other points that came up was somebody stated that they had no memories of play in their childhood. Now, obviously, I don't know who this person is. We haven't had a conversation about it, but it does leave a curiosity there. Is this evidence of premature standardization and industrial compliance? What do we mean by that? One of the key things that we're tackling in this module is the fact that we have to protect play. The reason why we need to protect play is for the protection of all of those things that we have just mentioned. All of those quotes, generally when I put these PowerPoints together, I normally have academic sources and all of this stuff. Now, all of the things that have been highlighted are all the things that come up in play theory. So we are trying to protect those things. We're trying to protect freedom. We're trying to protect community. We're trying to protect role play. We're trying to protect the preservation of our folktales. Through the protection of play, we're able to protect all of those things. So if we don't have memories of play, is that an indication of the beginning of the decline of play? Okay, this is something that we can explore in more detail. And somebody else also highlighted that their most vivid moments of play consisted of them being left alone to play by themselves. Now, I'm not trying to make a value judgment here. That might be a positive thing, that might be a negative thing. It could be a bit of both. Okay, we'll leave you there to decide what you think about that one. Moving on to the definitions of play, right? Having reflected on our own memories of play, we are looking at how people are defining play. And again, through this, we're able to see how play can be key to our collective liberation. So, somebody highlighted that play is an avenue for children to discover themselves and an activity for self expression. The last month or the month before, we looked at the things that we believe that education should do. We stated that we believe that education should enable children to have a strong sense of identity. And right here, we have defined that play is an avenue for children to discover themselves and to express themselves. Fantastic. We have also identified that true play occurs when a child participates freely without pressure or expectation of a reward. Again, if this is how we govern our society, where we live freely, where we live without pressure, or where we live without the expectation of a reward, what kind of society would we actually build? This is the reason why we have to preserve and value play. Because the more children play, the more this type of life, the more their brain is connecting and growing in this way. Their very foundation is where they are free, where they express themselves without pressure, where they do things without the expectation of a reward. This is what we call intrinsic motivation. This is the key to concentration. This is the key to achieving anything in life, is being intrinsically motivated. People also highlighted that the focus is usually on the experience itself than having or achieving a specific result. Now, what's so interesting about this? Anybody that's exploring mental health or mental or spiritual liberation, you recognize that the strategy that's promoted is being present. So, again, we're saying here that through play, children are able to focus on the experience itself, which is about being present, which is basically being mindful, right? These are all things that we now pay people to teach us how to do or to remind us how to do that come freely in play, come freely to us as human beings. Because remember, Froebel stated that play is the expression of what's inside the human soul. The challenge with all of this is, whilst we're talking about all of this, we're also talking about how we can use play to nurture children's development. Now, that means that there has to be a real balance here. And this is what I've called the dichotomy of play and learning and research, right? Is the majority of this module is going to be exploring how we research play, how we observe children's play, and how we use that to identify their genius and to support and nurture that. Okay, so there is a challenge, there's a balance there. How do we maintain this freedom of play where we are playing without the expectation of a reward and maintaining the focus on the experience itself? When we kind of have an agenda, right, we're using that play to nurture that child's development. However, again, you've highlighted here that true play is when a child is showing curiosity and creativity, participating freely without feeling forced. Now, how do we actually use play to nurture children's genius? We've identified here the importance of screen-free play. Now, this is such a big challenge right now, especially as we're talking about modernizing education in Africa. There is a real temptation that modernization looks like tech. And what's so interesting is this is very freely available out there. Okay. All of these tech moguls are sending their children to low or no tech schools. They are not introducing their children to tech until they are older, right? But yet we seem to be pushing our children towards this idea that they have to be IT literate before they can even stand up, even in order to compete. The reality is that what we need for the future, future proofing our society, ensuring that our collective liberation is maintained, is that children need to work with their hands. As identified here, whether that's with toys, sand, water, flowers, garden, vegetation, running around with each other, this really highlights the innate connection between all of creation, which is a fundamentally African principle. Another point that came up is somebody stated that children are in the zone when they're able to access so much information from their field of intelligence effortlessly. I absolutely love this quote. This one links the first point about the innate connection between all of creation, right? This idea of their field of intelligence is the broader intelligence, right? You can call that God. And this is something that, again, Friedrich Froebel, who I mentioned earlier on, highlighted, right? That through play, children are able to connect to themselves, nature, community, and God. It's like a direct flow. Being in a state of flow is where we are deeply concentrated. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you are so engaged in an activity that you lose all track of time. Now, the issue with screens now is children are not able to enter a state of flow without external stimulation. So, what does that mean? People can't concentrate. People have poor self regulation. Now, the inability to enter a state of flow means that we're not going to be able to think deeply or critically about problems. Managing and protecting the state of flow is our responsibility, again, as parents and educators. As a parent, there are so many times where I will avoid interrupting what my child is doing. And sometimes she's making a mess. Now, if I catch her making the mess, the mess is already made, right? But I can really see that she's in a really deep state of play or a very deep state of flow, exploring whatever it is that she's exploring. Now, there is still going to be a consequence. She's going to have to clean it up. We're going to go through all of that. But the reason why I try not to interrupt her, and I try not to interrupt her as much as possible, if you ever see me with children, you'll see this. I step back as much as possible, is you want to constantly cultivate environments for a state of flow. All of this and the lack thereof, people have identified that people seem to have an issue with social interactions and conversations, which is, again, a very anti African concept, right? We are community minded people. Does that mean that you can't be an introvert? Of course, you can be an introvert, right? But our fundamental values and our fundamental strengths are in community. And being able to exist within community is so important. I teach undergrads, and they're finding it very difficult to struggle and have social interactions. So, over the past couple of decades, play has been declining. And having worked in education for about 20 years now, I can see that anxiety is rising. We all know anxiety is rising. One of the key indicators, one of the key contributing factors to rising anxiety is the lack of play. How do we nurture and protect play? How do we use play to nurture children's learning and development? I'll give you the answers to that in the next video.